Joined out by Clayton Safey of the Wolverine, and we were texting Thursday afternoon right as the email popped into the mailbox that Michigan was not going to be contesting Jim Harbaugh's suspension anymore. Probably the most anticipated temporary restraining order hearing in the history of the Washtenaw County Courthouse, not happening.
Not happening. Yeah, we had kind of heard rumblings of this morning that things could kind of progress in this way. There were talks in the days before that they may reach some sort of settlement where he would miss the Maryland game but not the Ohio State game. But it seems like we had the NCAA, Big Ten, and Michigan. It was like the Michael Scott, Andy, and Dwight, and they were all pointing the guns at each other. But it seems like Michigan has put theirs down, at least for now, in this fight.
Yeah, this felt a little bit like a tactical retreat, especially reading what Chris Ballas, your publisher at the Wolverine, reported on Thursday morning, where he said that the NCAA had been back in, had talked to some Michigan players, and it looked like some more information had come out on that side of things. Was it a case of Michigan maybe not wanting to have some of that stuff out there and maybe used in a way that would make the suspension stand up anyway, and then you just waste all your time?
Yeah, the way I see it is partly that, yes, absolutely. And then, the fact that the Big Ten was probably continuing to put the pressure on them, and the reality that they could put in place some further punishments for Michigan in real time. Like, it's such a weird situation because the NCAA is investigating, but they're immediately relaying their information to the Big Ten, and the Big Ten, under their sportsmanship policy, apparently, right, unless they go to court and prove that they can't, they can issue punishments in real time again. Right. So I think that's the important piece of this, where it's like, okay, maybe they are finding stuff, or maybe they're very intent on disrupting Michigan's game week flow of interviewing players, whatever, like you said, that Chris Ballas reported. And Michigan said, all right, we can't let this happen when we have a special team here. We got 2 games left. And frankly, you don't want them to say, hey, you can't play in the Big Ten championship game, or we're not going to allow you to go to the playoff. Now, you would know better than me exactly how much they can do on that front, especially when it comes to the playoff. But I think Michigan probably said, okay, we don't have a ton of confidence in what Friday's hearing is going to, result in anyway. And let's not let this go, to a place where the Big Ten could issue further punishments. We'll back down for now. The Big Ten, the most key part of that press release, Andy, to me, was that the Big Ten's investigation is done, that it's in the NCAA's hands. And as we know, NCAA at some point can issue a notice of allegations, but Michigan gets 90 days to respond. 90 days from today, which they're not going to get one today, right? But 90 days from today is well after the season. So this season, other than Jim Harbaugh for 3.5 hours on the next 2 Saturdays, is going to go on as normally as it can now that they're in this situation.
Right, and I think that is an important point to make, because if there's a tit for tat in this whole situation, if there's a trade going on, it is the Big Ten is closing the matter and saying, this is the suspension. We'll let the NCAA handle the rest of it, which we all know is going to be a long time from now.
Right.
And that does make the most sense, like when you look at it that way. But I think you're right. I got to tell you about Prize Picks. You know I love Prize Picks. You can download that Prize Picks app today. Use the referral code Andy. They will match your first deposit up to $100. It is the most fun daily fantasy platform available in a lot of places, including Florida and Texas and California. And how do you play? You're picking squares. And they have squares for every sport. NFL, NBA, NHL, and of course, college football and college basketball now. College football ones are the ones we're interested in. This is a college football show. We know the most about college football. And we like having fun with these games. And some of these are very interesting this week. I was going through the Prize Picks selections that had come out on Thursday. How about this one? The game in Knoxville, Georgia and Tennessee. So Joe Milton, 210.5 passing yards, more or less. So you pick squares. You pick at least 2, up to 6. You decide if somebody's more than or less than the number. So Joe Milton, 210.5, more than or less than. Against the Georgia defense, I don't know. But 210.5 for Joe Milton is not a big number. It's not. Carson Beck, meanwhile, that man's got his weapons now. They're expecting big things. 287.5, more or less, for Carson Beck. Now, the one I'm the most interested in for the quarterbacks, though, my man Deacon Hill from the Iowa Hawkeyes. He had his best passing game since he took the starting job after Cade McNamara got hurt against Rutgers last week. He was slinging it. He's only got a number of 127.5 against Illinois this weekend. Now, Illinois and Indiana engaged in a little bit of a shootout last week. I don't know that Iowa is going to be able to play a pure shootout, nor will they want to. But if Deacon Hill can have the performance he had against Rutgers, which is a pretty good defense, then I got to go more than on this one. I can tell you right now. So Friday nights, I'll send out potential picks. Sometimes Saturday mornings I will. And we'll do it on Twitter. And some of you guys will give me advice, and I'll often not take it. But occasionally I will take it. But you're not talking me out of this one. I guarantee you I'm going to have a play that includes Deacon Hill more than 127.5. Guaranteed. But there's some other fun stuff like Michael Penix Jr., the Washington quarterback. He's going to Corvallis. They're playing at Oregon State. Remember, Oregon State is favored in this game. So Michael Penix, 2.5 passing plus rushing plus receiving touchdowns, more or less. That feels like an automatic more than. We're going to talk a lot more about Michigan. We've already talked a bunch about Michigan. Well, here's you got your Michigan pass catchers, your targets, Roman Wilson and Cornelius Johnson. Now remember, Michigan only threw 8 times against Penn State. I don't think that's a function of Sharon Moore being the acting head coach. He's the offensive line coach. He just wants to run it. I think that they felt like that was the best way to beat Penn State. I would imagine that they are going to throw the ball quite a bit more against Maryland. So Roman Wilson is 54.5 receiving yards. Cornelius Johnson is 38.5. That's a juicy one because, again, I think they're going to throw a heck of a lot more against Maryland than they threw against Penn State. So, you know, that Roman Wilson number, they only threw for 60 yards total, the whole team last week. I'm guessing that number goes significantly higher this week. So go to Prize Picks, download that app, use the code Andy. They will match your first deposit up to $100. Get in on the fun. It is a blast going through. Your games are about to start, and you're like, ooh, who do I have? Well, this weekend, I don't know who else I have, but I got Deacon Hill. I'm riding for Deacon Hill this weekend. I mean, it's hard to say because we've not seen a situation like this where a conference has just gone off and punished prior to the NCAA even issuing a notice of allegation. So, you know, reading the sportsmanship policy, there's definitely interpretation for it where if they want to attack more on, they probably could have.
Yeah, it seems like it. And I'm sure that's what, you know, again, there were discussions over the last few days heading into this hearing where I'm sure they probably kept bringing that up. Hey, we can continue to punish you, you know, and if you don't get this TRO granted on Friday, and obviously that's not going to, you know, hearing's not going to happen anymore, as we said, but, you know, going in, they're probably saying, if you don't get this granted, then we can still kind of do whatever we want here. And, you know, I think a lot of it falls back on the judge they got, Timothy Connors in the Washtenaw County Court. When we found out, we were having dinner with a lawyer. I think I mentioned this on when I was on Saturday, but we were having dinner with a lawyer in the state of Michigan, went to University of Michigan. When he found out it was Timothy Connors, he kind of dropped his head and he was like, oh shoot, this guy is, you know, maybe not the guy you want up there. So I think they wanted to get that thing last Friday. That was the most ideal situation. The fact that it went to this Friday was not good news for Jim Harbaugh and for Michigan. And when you look at the big picture too, that you have to, and there's always so many angles when it comes to Jim Harbaugh, but the press release said that he decided this and that the university supported him. If you're Michigan fans, I think you very much hope that he decided this, that he's on board with this, because, you know, I mean, frankly, he hasn't been on board with a few of the things that Michigan's done. And you want to keep him happy. You want to, you know, make him feel the love, as he says. And, you know, that's a key component with this too, when you look more at the big picture.
Right. He's more of a wild card than most coaches in these situations, because usually the coach just goes, all right, you pay my checks. What would you like me to do? And
he's the alpha, but he doesn't make this final decision potentially. Right.
Yeah, it is. And so now they're going to play Maryland. Sharon Moore will be the acting head coach, just as he was against Penn State. One thing that I think is interesting to point out, and for those who haven't followed it super closely, Jim Harbaugh is allowed to coach them at practice. He's allowed to be involved in game planning. So as you pointed out, those 3.5 hours on the 2 Saturdays are the only other times he's going to miss now.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, you're going to go into Maryland. I mean, they're 19.5-point favorites. They should take care of business this weekend. And really, for people that don't know, too, I mean, this is going to be their 1,000th win. Whatever their next win is, you would assume it's when they're 20-point favorites this weekend. And Jim Harbaugh, I'm sure it'll pain him not to be there. But I assume he travels to College Park. Yeah. I assume he sees them off, as they head on the buses to the stadium. And obviously he'll be on the flight home and everything. So he's not going to be too far away, literally, this weekend. And then obviously in Ann Arbor the next weekend against Ohio State. So that's going to help this team as they move forward. He's going to have his imprints on the game plan. Sharon Moore is basically his closest confidant when you look at the on-field coaches anyway. So, and Andy, I know you have strong feelings too on, the way Sharon Moore handled that game against Penn State. I think you got to feel pretty good if you're a Michigan
I thought he handled it brilliantly. Yeah. I'm a big fan of keep doing the thing that's working. And so I've had people say, well, what does that say about JJ McCarthy? If you actually look at it, Michigan had a better efficiency day passing the ball against Penn State than most teams that have played Penn State. So they were doing fine. And I just, for Sharon Moore, you never know with coaches how they're going to be when they are the guy who has to make those final ultimate decisions about, strategy and timeouts and that sort of thing. And I thought he did a pretty good job. Now he'd gotten a game to do that earlier in the season, but if we're really looking at it big picture, that's still only his second game on the sideline as the guy in charge. I thought he handled it pretty well, given that 107,000 people screaming and pretty good defense on the other side of the field.
It's huge that he had the experience not only earlier in the year, but in this last game where that, the Bowling Green game, and it really didn't go as planned anyway. They threw 3 interceptions. It turned it over 4 times. They still won by 24 points. But, this was really the big test for him. Penn State on the road, like you said. And now you go in, and now for a fact heading in, you have your game plan heading into these last 2 games. You don't have to wait till an hour and a half before where you realize that you're not going to get this court injunction granted by game time. So they're going to be better, equipped, I think, these next couple games with Sharon Moore there. He has the big game under his belt, which is huge for him. He still has a lot on his plate. He's coaching the offensive line. He's the offensive coordinator. He is getting help, though. Mike Hart was the one calling timeouts. Jesse Minter was, I was on the field and walking past the sideline a couple times. There were a couple times Sharon's just sitting by the O-line and drawing stuff up on the whiteboard, even though he's the head coach, right? And then he would go over and watch the defense from the sideline once he made some adjustments. So it's still something I think they're working through, but I feel like they have a pretty good plan, all things considered.
It is amazing to me, though, and obviously this will become much more real after the Maryland game, but Jim Harbaugh is not going to be on the sidelines for Ohio State. Yeah. That is wild to think about in the big picture.
I said it on a radio show earlier. Like, we are a part of, like, there's going to be a book about this. There's going to be a 30 for 30. Like, we're part of what they're going to be writing about. Maybe it'll be one of us, right? But, the history books here of, like, the head coach has been taken off the field for the Michigan-Ohio State game. That is not a small thing. It's a historic thing. And it's wild. And then you think of it from an Ohio State standpoint, there's a ton of pressure on Ryan Day right now. And, James Franklin got booed off the field, and, people were about to throw some things at him.
He fired his offensive coordinator the next day.
He fired his offensive coordinator. Like, you lost to a team without a head coach. You got outcoached by a team without a head coach. So if Ryan Day, if that happens to him, then it would not be good news for him, I think, obviously, because you already can't lose 3 in a row, let alone one of them not, to a team without their head coach. So that is an interesting piece of this from the Ohio State standpoint. And if Michigan does lose, the win for Ryan Day doesn't look as good as it would have if Jim Harbaugh was over there.
Right,
so
it feels somewhat hollow. And then
it would be an excuse a little bit, I guess.
Yeah. Another point you brought up that I had not thought about, but if Michigan beats Maryland this weekend, it is win number 1,000.
Yeah,
for the Michigan program. And now Sharon Moore may well wind up the head coach of this program for a significant amount of time. He might be the next guy after Jim Harbaugh. however that ends. And
Mhm.
we'll hesitate speculating on that. We have a while before we have to speculate on that further.
Yeah.
But he may be the head coach of this program in the future. But the fact that he's the interim, the acting head coach, could be the one who puts his name in the book with Fielding Yost and Bo Schembechler and Lloyd Carr as the guy who won number 1,000 for this program. Like, that's an incredible footnote to that particular entry.
It is. And I do wonder, because they did some weird things, because there was one game, obviously, as you know, they had Mike Hart for the second half. It was Jay Harbaugh for the first half against UNLV. So they've been doing some interesting things with the record book there. But Sharon Moore, we talked to him yesterday, and he said that, I don't know if it's his call or not, but he said it would certainly be Jim Harbaugh's win. And obviously you wouldn't expect him to say anything else, but you're right. I mean, you look at these records and everything, it's wild that he could be the guy. And like you said, down the road, whenever that is, that could be next year, that could be in 5 years, he may be the head coach of this program, and he would have had that feat, in 2023.
This is unprecedented stuff. It's crazy. Now, would have been crazy to see the court hearing. Saw all the TV stations that had lined up to try to go cover it. Would have been something to see, but does seem like a tactical retreat for Michigan. And now we know how it's going to go for the Wolverines for the next 2 games. No Jim Harbaugh. Clayton, thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples on 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On3 Sports YouTube channel.